My name is Willie Prot Majola, and I am the full-time regulator member responsible for electricity regulation. I will be the chairperson of this hearing. I would now like to introduce the members of the panel. As I introduce each member, I kindly request that they greet the public on video where possible. So I'm going to start with Mr. Tembani Pukula, the chairperson of the energy regulator, and who's also a member of the electricity subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Majola. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Chair.
And then I'm going to call upon Advocate Nomalanga Sitole, the Chief Executive of NESA.
Good morning, Chairperson, and everyone who has joined us for this particular public hearing. Thank you.
And then Ms. Nomfundo Maseti is a full-time regulator member responsible for pipe gas regulations, also a member of the ELS.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning to the members of the Electricity Subcommittee, and good morning to the members of the public that have joined this platform. Thank you.
And now I call upon Mr. Musuvugile Mkize, a full-time regulator member responsible for petroleum pipelines regulations, as well as a member of the ELS.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Greetings to you and everyone that is on the call. Thank you.
And also we have Ms. Tembeka Semane, a chairperson of the Finance Committee and also a member of the Electricity Subcommittee.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to you and good morning to NESA colleagues and also to the members of the public. Thanks.
Thank you. So this hearing was duly advertised in various newspapers, on NESA's social media platforms, and on the NESA website. It is conducted in accordance with the Energy Regulator Act, which provides affected parties with an opportunity to submit their views and present relevant facts and evidence to the energy regulator. The hearing is governed by the NESA rules on public hearings, which may be summarized as follows. All parties are required to make their presentations under oath. Applicants have been allocated 20 minutes each to present. Only members of the panel may ask questions to the presenters. However, members of the public may submit questions via email to publichearings@nesa.org.za, after which the panel will determine how such questions will be addressed. And should any presenter wish to present information deemed confidential, the panel will rule on whether the hearing should be closed for that portion or whether the information should be submitted in writing. Please note that the audio recording captured via the microphones will constitute official record of this hearing. The following house rules apply for the meeting. All participants are required to remain muted when not presenting, unless invited to speak. And please keep your video switched off unless requested by the chairperson to switch it on. NESA has received 2 requests to present. We will begin with Mr. Vincent Kok from Saweya. The following process applies to each presenter, co-presenter, and individuals assisting in the questions. So we'll ask that the presenter, so we are now going to ask Mr. Vincent Kok. So Mr. Vincent Kok, can you kindly switch on your camera?
Good morning, team.
Thank you. And then raise your please raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are about to give before this panel is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Gok, you may now proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, colleague. I would like to ask if my background noise isn't excessive. Pardon, I am in a public space as I am busy traveling. So I'm in the process now of sharing my screen. If I can kindly confirm that John can kindly confirm I'm visible as well as audible.
I can hear you.
See the presentation, Mr. Majola?
And I can also see the presentation on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Good morning again, and we appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to take you through our responsive submission and the content thereof. I would be quite quick. I think I have roughly 15 minutes. As an introduction, so we as a member-based organization advocating for the accelerated growth of wind energy in South Africa, we aim to promote a sustainable sector by influencing better policy environment that provides substantial benefits for the nation. Our position in respect of the transmission development rules that we support the transmission planning framework that prioritizes connection enablement, transparency, coordinated system development. Also, focusing on the speed of grid access, visible project pipelines, predictable delivery, whilst also providing clarity on investment and capacity availability. That being said, effective planning should also be aligned with national and regional priorities, which I will elaborate on during this presentation. Incorporate modern technologies, grid following, grid forming, smart grid technology, as well as facilitate early stage yet credible projects to complete fairly, ultimately ensuring the grid can reliably and securely accommodate future demand growth for the energy mix envisioned in the integrated resource plan. Some colleagues would recall that my previous presentation on GCAR had exactly the same graph or illustration available, and that just unpacks the grid process understanding for us. We've got a scoping phase, a capacity phase, the allocation rules, which have now been gazetted, the queuing phase, which is the grid access unit, and the connection phase guided by the grid code advisory committee and the tech team. So today we'll be discussing the scoping phase. And as you can see from this graph, it is the initiator for the rest of the process to follow. That being said, my previous presentation in GCAR also pointed out the bottlenecking impact the further you go downstream. But we're actually sitting here at an inflection point where the opportunity is there to debottleneck, predominantly because generation pipeline uncertainty would be provided once sound TPP rules are advocated and gazetted. We are going to sit at a point of policy alignment where in its latest and amended forms, IRP would be reflected in the latest TDP, as well as other policies like energy security bill, the integrated energy plan, and any more electrification legislation that goes along with it. In light of the recent congestion curtailment practices to be used as a constrained generation ancillary service, we would also see cost savings from the level of curtailment that the TSO needs to let happen to ensure grid stability and integrity remains intact. Lastly, then, in respect of the congestion and constraints, specifically in the Cape regions where the wind resources are quite high, we would have a decreased level of dependence, the follow-on connections that can only happen with first connection. Noting also from NERSA's consultation paper the greater goal, non-discriminatory access to the grid for both customers and electric. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you quickly through some of the questions. The crux of it is captured here, but it is also mentioned in our submission that we made on the consultation paper. What I would like to focus on is actually the list of recommendations that we have specifically that focus on some of the questions, but have a broader or more holistic perspective to some of the answers. So on the first question, the draft rule specifying various aspects to be included in the content and structure, we are saying these provide a solid foundation land, but emphasizing system stability and storage needs, especially in relation to battery or any other form of energy storage, is quintessential, as well as seeing that in parallel with grid stabilizers. Do recall also NERSA's consultation on synchronous condensers, predominantly for the southern corridor of the country due to the high penetration of renewables. A stronger focus on transparency and connection enablement, where clear project pipeline status updates are provided. This disclosure on methodology and mapping the megawatts or the MVA capacity released per upgrade. What I'm not making reference to here has been captured in our submission as some of the best practice recommendations from respective United Kingdom, USA, Australian, and European system operators. For question number 2, the draft rules outline specific requirements for conducting capacity analysis. We're saying these requirements are sufficient, but to further enhance transparency and connection enablement, milestones and status updates begin, as well as strengthening their capacity analysis through dynamic scenario-based settings, considering modern technologies, explicit fault level studies on nodal level, and institutional delivery capacity, and cognizance and consideration for the batch generation connection frameworks that is also en route to become a live ESCOM document going forward. On question number 3, the network investment and increased economic cost reduction requirements. To fully support timely and large-scale transmission expansion, we actually need a wider range of criteria for consideration, which includes but is not limited to system stability, renewable integration, synchronous and asynchronous generators, congestion reduction, asset condition. So that takes into account the decommissioning of the ESCOM coal fleet and some other aging assets, and generation enablement value. So what we mean with enablement value is the economic stimuli or ripple effect when a generator has received the opportunity to connect to the grid. Economic development, impact, and delivery speed should also inform prioritization. What is the standalone metric? Because we don't want to squander on the technical integrity of the grid so that economic items gain preference. On question 4, estimated capital cost for each transmission project. These should be appropriately outlined, and again, to enhance transparency and financial viability, we need to conform all committed funding, incorporating a time value and opportunity cost analysis. I use the example of a reduction in curtailment costs, and the trade-off needs to be weighed against each other so that we can actually quantify the deferred profit for the TSO, but also the gains in that respect because of the early engagement or for pulling certain projects forward and the benefit that we do offer. On question 5, the stakeholder consultation process, we recommend explicitly including project developers, investors, and the renewable industry association, as it was in the past. But what we also have observed on cluster level or regional level, these engagements also need to take place. And in the greater scheme of the South African wholesale electricity market, as well as integration, regional integration through the South African power pool and all the interconnectors that are also building in parallel with the transmission development plan, greater engagement with those colleagues need to take place as well. I'm well aware of countries like Mozambique and Namibia with respect to hydro and solar PV projects, which might be to the benefit of the SAP and SADC region. Maybe just to get to the additional comments. So a mention was made to the words strategic power corridors. And our opinion is that that word cannot be used lightly. So to define it, connect it to a metric so that it's an explicit definition, which will be to the benefit of our projects are streamlined as well as prioritized. The definition depicted here doesn't need to be used verbatim. It is merely a suggestion, but so that we focus on designated transmission development section identified through the criteria-based assessment. And that is the example where we mentioned economic stimuli, stability on offer for the greater nodes or resources in the surrounding area, as well as a sustainable supply that is on offer, and the reliability benefits to the system operator as well, to alleviate network congestion, improving resilience, and delivering demonstrable net socio-economic value. Maybe just on our list of recommendations, purely going into the consultation paper now, there's a definition referred to for customer, and I'm well aware NTCSA serves both the off-taker as well as the generator due to its nature as mediator or intermediate rather, and for the wires business. But for customers, a demand profile can't necessarily be submitted. It might be business as usual. If it's a smelter, it's a different story because it's an energy intensive user. If it's a generator, forecasting can be submitted from a wind farm as an example. But these items become difficult if it's a retail level or smaller towns where it's from distribution has got foresight of that. In parallel, I'll get later to the point of demand considerations that also needs to be taken into account. On the second bullet, we've noted a repetition in the respective codes where there's normative reference for. We're asking for normative reference to be made to specific definitions. So generator in the transmission codes should be the same definition as generator in the TDP rules. Otherwise, we just make normative reference, or the specific definition must be superseded or specific to a predetermined act. Probably one of our biggest observations and asks, or what is on our wish list, is that we've got policies, plans, and projects that all need to be seen in parallel and all need to talk to one another. The reason for asking that is you're sitting with TDP 2024, which gives you the horizon 25 to 2034, which is still only aligned with IRP 2023 that was not gazetted and that was not used in consultations going forward. The disparity in that regard is, for an example, you're sitting with type A projects according to the South African Renewable Energy Grid Survey of 1.6 gigawatts for wind, and I believe roughly just under 2 gigawatts for solar PV in the northern corridors of the country. So this is the western parts of KwaZulu-Natal, northern parts of the Free State, south and southeastern Gauteng, western of Mpumalanga, of projects that are shovel ready and ready to connect. But because the transmission planning doesn't prioritize that, irrespective of the capacity available, these projects won't go online soon and there could be changes and makes explicit reference thereto. Is, and maybe it's just a perceived experience, but it is a chicken and egg depicted in the South African Renewable Energy Grid Survey, where we would think that transmission expansion should follow the generator, but it is actually the other way around, because generators know they've got a higher likelihood to connect if they are closer to existing transmission networks. That being said, what would offer greater investor confidence is the risk matrix for tracking projects, comparing their plan versus actual runner, so that the interfacing impact of generator starting with construction, putting the first shovel in the ground, once they know pylons and wires have been erected and just yet to be connected. Maybe pausing there and saying demand considerations on both ends is that we do have SAREFs, we do have IRP. Both of those are planning vehicles used in the TCP. But similarly, there needs to be taken into account the reductions, demand reduction, where smelters are closing down in light of no agreed tariff, making that where the electricity is extremely expensive for these energy intensive users. But the same process needs to be executed where all smelters or mothballed energy intensive users like other mines, refineries, and factories restart in light of greater electricity liberalization, because that will be a quick 15 gigawatts that's again depleted from the grid and from the cold reserves available from the Eskom fleet and the entire nominal installed capacity within the country. Similarly, there might be changes to the TDC when large load centers pull to the coastal regions. I think hydrogen electrolyzers in the Eastern Cape, Western Cape steel producers, as well as data centers along the coastlines. On internal stakeholder engagements, we did mention liaison with the SAP countries, but also internal to NTCSA staff. It has been some of our observations that the respective departments don't talk to each other, or there might be slight misalignment, which further exacerbates project delivery or next steps that need to be actioned per department. That being said, the last recommendation on our end is also to look at a nodal approach or a main transmission substation approach when it comes to available MVAs or capacity. And should generators be able to connect on substation level, that costs be amortized by the list of potential connectors. And it's purely to say that self-built has been good for the private and public sector for wind projects, but socializing the costs because of the self-built, an example of a 1.5 billion main transmission substation, does get absorbed into the tariff that IPP ultimately sells back to the market. The ripple effect is the end consumer still carries that cost. If it gets amortized, the cost is shared among these IPPs, also bringing down the name tag thereof. That serves as then our closure. So we remain committed to constructive engagement and transparent processes that will ensure successful implementation of wind projects in South Africa. We thank you for the opportunity and would also welcome any questions. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Cock, for your presentation. And now I'm going to invite members of the regulator to pose any questions if they have to you. So thank you to the members of the regulator. If they've got any questions. I see Ms. Maseti. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you to Mr. Cock for his presentation. I just want to ask a question of clarity on the slide where he was answering a question relating to capital costs. You made mention of some factors, including congestion curtailment related costs. I would like to understand the significance of mentioning the congestion curtailment cost in this context of capital cost. Is it your suggestion that cost associated with congestion curtailment be considered as part of the cost that the capital cost that one would have to consider for these projects? I just want to understand and the reasons for that. If one has to take into account congestion curtailment cost as part of the cost that must be considered under capital cost. What will be the rationale and justification for that if you are of the view that they be taken as part of such cost? The second question that I just want to find out from you, at least from your perspective or the perspective of SAWEA, when you are looking at these proposed rules, are you satisfied that they are comprehensive enough to avoid any sort of potential undue project delays from planning up until the execution of these projects? Are you satisfied that the rules have covered the critical basis to avoid any such delays or delays in terms of project execution and commissioning of the project? Then the third thing that I just want to understand is around the prioritization methodology that has been mentioned. You've also mentioned it in your presentation. Can you just shed some light here? What are some of the sort of things that needs to be prioritized here? Some of the stakeholders made mention of an emphasis that there should be renewables that are supposed to be prioritized here. Are you sharing the same views, even though the policy documents such as the IRP 2025 is looking at different energy, the generation mixes, the different sources of energy that must be used to produce electricity. It's not only considering renewables. So I just want to understand from your side, under the context of prioritization methodologies, whether these rules or any development that will be socialized, by the way, the cost of this transmission, that they should prioritize renewables. Those are the three questions that I have for Mr. Kok. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Maseti. And now I'm going to call upon Mr. Mkize.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, Mr. Kok, for the presentation. Please just help me to understand if I understood you correctly. I'm just thinking here that you are actually saying that these rules are workable, but you need to have some enhancement there too, which, for example, you talk of explicitly stating that the other parties to be consulted are must say that the IPPs. But as you can see that in the regulation itself, it is stated that other affected parties, for example, and then two, you when you're citing alignment with other policies, I take it that whenever one is drafting rules and the regulator must take decision based on published government policy, that those will have to be taken into cognizance in any event. And lastly, I would just like to know from my side, when it comes to the demand profiles, why are you averse to that, noting that they would be essential for better planning in any event? I just did not understand your aversion there too. Thank you.
Okay, over to you, Mr. Kok.
Thank you, Mr. Matola. I made explicit notes, but where I am short of any answers, please interrupt and I'll elaborate more if possible. Ms. Maseti, thank you. I'm going to answer your first one on the congestion curtailment cost. So the notes that I made here for why there's rationale and the reasons behind the capital consideration is, with any project in life, if we're delaying certain things, there's a deferred profit. A profit we didn't achieve because of late commissioning. And there's a binary approach towards transmission expansion. The mere fact that we're sitting with congestion curtailment now in an effort to connect more generators is as a result of historic lack of execution of transmission. And yes, a lot of these renewable projects, for a lot of developers, a lot of them connected quite quickly. But you even see it now with bid window 7, the first announcement and second announcement of solar PV. If we don't accelerate transmission expansion, even majority of the Free State would be saturated, congested from the grid perspective 2-3 years from now, when these plants are built, constructed, commissioned, and delivered down back into the grid. Predominantly also because of the renewable nature, which is intermittent and destabilizes the grid, or offers the variability because of the nature of the technology. Those also pose some challenges. So, in short, the reason for allowing it as a capital cost is that because of lack of capacity available, we could have connected, but because we're not connecting, we're accommodating the grid by freeing up space. But even that congestion curtailment, the deferred or the deemed energy lost that the IPP can then claim from the TSA or from NTCSA is an expense that NTCSA. Yes, they're budgeting for it. I completely agree. The argument would be if sufficient transmission capacity would have been available, by that time. But even to all the TDP milestones that we have historically referred to, congestion curtailment would be null and void. That's the first item. The second item would be, and I recall that from the congestion curtailment consultation process, is that congestion curtailment should never be a replacement for transmission expansion. It is an interim solution we're looking at, and then it should be taken over at this stage by growth in the transmission network, greater availability, greater redundancy. If 1.1 is deemed answered, I would like to go to 1.2. Are we satisfied that the rules are comprehensive, and what delays do we foresee in that regard? Across the board, what we are seeing, and I almost want to say it's a plethora of partners, state organs and parties all of our developers work with. As you can imagine, if the IRP calls for 43 gigawatts of wind and respective technology capacity allocations for solar as well by a specific year, you've got all these developers running in parallel, submitting applications for grid access unit, to the DFFE for permitting, to the Civil Aviation Authority. And the cross-cutting theme through all of this, and it has exacerbated in the last 5 years, is the shortage of institutional capacity. I know that doesn't answer your question, but it stems from a point of policy in South Africa is 100% or very close to 100% perfect and accurate. Where we are lacking is the implementation, and the implementation isn't due to incompetency. It is purely due to a capacity constraint. So my thoughts in that regard is that consciousness from NTCSA is then given to say, well, we've got these draft rules that are comprehensive, enforceable, and would be executed accordingly. But do we have the physical, institutional numbers, resources to run with this projects so that we ensure there's close to zero delivery delay and they actually get implemented from first application for permitting up until we push electrons into the grid. So that is mainly an institutional capacity challenge that we have. The second leg to that would be that it is NERSA's mandate to assist us with these rules, and we are thankful for it. But again, it becomes an institutional capacity challenge if a policing forum, for lack of a better term, needs to be implemented to monitor these items. Perhaps within NTCSA, they can capacitate themselves with agile style project management and scrum meetings to ensure efficient execution with the respective teams that's going to help them reach these goals at 1,400 kilometers per year. If that one is also sufficiently answered, we would like to answer 1.3, which is the prioritization methodology. And do we explicitly place emphasis on the fact that renewable energy needs to be prioritized in light of the IRP also making reference to other technologies. So yeah, it's probably one of the only associations that would definitely tell you that we are for our technology, but we put the energy mix first. And that is our main priority. We cannot sit with a point of blackout state throughout the country because of pushing a certain mandate for renewables only. We are well aware there's allocation nuclear, and with their positional efficiency, it will explicitly help with grid stabilization, offering baseload on the coastal regions or base supply back into the grid. That being said, the onus and responsibility and where we take direction from would emanate from NTCSA plus the system operator. So when the system operator tells us, for example, we've got an oversupply mid-day, we know we've got too much solar and we're peak shaving because there is no demand. Wind provides the inverse of the bell curve, so that's early morning, late evening generation, and it complements solar very well. And that being said, if certain challenges come in and baseload takes the forefront, we respect that as the utility needs to ensure a sustainable and resilient grid. Mr. Mkhize, if I can answer your question. So the affected parties inclusion, and maybe to elaborate slightly, is what we have noticing is the term has been coined, and I might have it incorrect, but regulatory renting. So when there's prospects of transmission development plan corridors and certain servitudes, some parties are well aware of it and they'll purchase farms and sell it back at the premium because of the knowledge of what they have and the servitude costing that would come in that regard. Noting that the expropriation with compensation is a vehicle, I do believe it might be abused in the past, in the future. So consciousness of all parties on community level, on cluster level, to say between Gamma and grassroots, there's going to be a 400 kV line. We're well aware of the environmental sensitivities, but let's go and have a look and have the conversation with the communities that are impacted as a result of that, with the IPPs that are in close proximity to this planned transmission line or the planned substation that will be placed. Also noting what you said on the codes and the normative references, thank you for clarifying that. So it would all refer to a master code or a code that is applicable, that's overarching, or it would explicitly define it in respect of these rules as a standout rule or definition, where it's defined otherwise in a different form of act. Pertaining to the demand profiles, as mentioned, it might be again that some of the internal departments within ECCSA needs to have full sight of what is happening. And the reason for saying that is I'm well aware of the export capacity South Africa NTCSA also has to some of the SADC countries. We've got a couple of belts in the northern parts or southern parts of Zambia and northern parts of Zambia. These are all energy intensive users. We saw April load shedding, and if you corresponded with the generation data, it was when Lake Kariba was at its minimum and Kahora Bassa. Those were imports we were maybe relying on the latter one. And local usage that Zambia Zimbabwe had in mind, but it couldn't be achieved because of record droughts. It is then that ESCOM and NTCSA needs to allocate those electrons to some of those neighboring countries due to existing agreements, but it's also neglecting South Africa of the opportunity of electricity. That being said, in light of greater economic stimuli in the work production of critical resources and employment creation, when smelters start up, it's baseload being pulled from the grid, and hence why if tariffs are agreed to at the lower margin at which they were historically, and it's favorable to some of the miners and the smelters, cognizance needs to be given that those reserves would be depleted from there. And predominantly because these energy intensive users are in the northern parts of the country, it again exhausts and almost chokes the north-south disparity, which is roughly sitting at 15 gigawatt. Hence, the strengthening required for the 765 kV line. I hope I have answered all the questions. Happy to receive some.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kok. We're now going to call upon our next presenter, who is Ms. Dudu Hadebe. So, Ms. Hadebe, can you kindly switch on your camera and raise your right hand and affirm the following? Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are about to give before the panel is in truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, Chair. Thank you.
So for the record, can you please state your name, organization, and designation?
Good morning, Chair, again. I am Dudu Hadebe, representing NTCSA. My current role is that of a corporate specialist within the grid planning space. I'm also serving as the acting senior manager for grid planning.
Thank you, Ms. Hadebe. You may now proceed with your presentation, and you have 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chair. May I ask for the presentation to be uploaded?
Just for clarity, Ms. Hadebe, you mean to be projected from our end?
Yes, I've just sent it. I was asked to send it to a Mr. Walter, which I did.
It's received. Thank you. Let me work on it.
Thank you. Thank you for this, Walter. Once again, colleagues, good morning. Appreciative of the opportunity to be addressing you on behalf of NCCSA to register our formal comments on the draft TDP rules that have been published by NERSA for commenting by various interested and affected stakeholders, one being the NCCSA. Perhaps by way of introduction, to perhaps register that we may recall that historically, the TDP has been the responsibility of the then transmission company, which then evolved to being an NCCSA, and that particular responsibility was carried through and reflected in the operating license that was issued to NCCSA. It is therefore on this basis that we feel we are still an affected and interested stakeholder in partaking in commenting on the draft TDP rules. May I ask that you go to the next slide? Thank you. In terms of rationale, briefly, our understanding of the brief is that we've been requested to submit considered views on the framework that NERSA is proposing regarding the development of future publications of the TDP. And this was expressed in the form of the consultation paper, which we reviewed, and we are therefore here to then register our views formally. Our understanding of the this framework is that these rules, they seek to establish a very formalized, standardized, and foreseeable principles that will guide future publications of the TDP. We also understand as NCCSA that once these rules are codified, they will ensure that the expansion of the transmission system will be undertaken efficiently, transparently, and expeditiously in line with the requirements of the ERA Section 35(3)A. Perhaps as a key takeaway, before I get into the details of the presentation, our main messaging today, colleagues, is that our view is that these rules are aligned with the current NCCSA TDP process that we've been following for the past 2 decades or so on many aspects that the document has outlined. And areas where we seek some areas of convergence, I shall highlight in the next few slides as I proceed with the presentation. May I ask that you go to the next slide, Walter, where I then go straight into responding to the questions that have been posed to the stakeholders. On the first question, colleagues, around the adequacy of the proposed content and structure of the TDP plan, NERSA's view is that it is welcoming the requirement in terms of asking of the TSO to publish a 5-year forward-looking TDP by the end of each October, whereby we are indicating the major planned capital investments. And as I may have alluded to this earlier on, this is a practice we've been upholding in any event as NCCSA for the past 2 decades or so. We are therefore comfortable that the current provisions or proposed provisions of the TDP rules going forward are in line with the practice that we have been upholding as NCCSA. Secondly, on this same question, we wish to register that our view is that once the TSO has been established, that the TDP should henceforth exclude the refurbishment component of the plan on the basis that each TSP, such as ITPs, they'd be responsible for their own refurbishment plans into the future. Next slide, please. Regarding the second question, Chair, on the adequacy of grid connection capacity requirements, NCCSA's response is that we would like to gain clarity specifically around clauses 6.1E and F, which appear to be new requirements for the TDP. Historically, we have not included these components in our publications of the TDP. We therefore are requesting that the rules create clarity by expanding on them so that we have certainty around the frequency of availing this particular information in future TDP publications, as well as the level of data that is expected of us going forward. On the slide, I'm just highlighting, or rather intending to highlight the clauses in question that I've just spoken about, so 6.1E and F. E specifically asking of the rules to assess available connection capacity over time, and secondly, the identification of areas where capacity is exhausted or limited. This is specifically an area where we request some clarity so that we are able to meet the requirement appropriately. Next slide, please. On the third question, Chair, regarding the adequacy of the criteria for network investments, we have assessed what the draft TDP rules are proposing, and NCCSA's position is that the network investment criteria are in line with the provisions as specified in the Grid Code Network Code currently. On the fourth question, which pertains to the adequacy of cost estimation requirements, this is perhaps, Chair, one area where we are also requesting a deviation from the currently proposed provision in the draft rules, whereby our view is that the TDP should exclude a project's list with costing that is related to it. Why so? Chair, this is on the basis that we are of the view that this would indicate the cost per project to the markets, and in turn negatively impact the competitiveness of tendering and contracting for work efficiently and cost effectively. Secondly, we also recommend that the proposed list, project list, be limited to merely just the list itself with the required timelines only, without any granularity at a project level basis around costing. And that we continue with a practice where we have been presenting costing in a summarized form so that specific costing cannot be deducted on the basis of competitiveness reasons I've just spoken to. Next slide, Walter. On the last question, colleagues, regarding the adequacy of stakeholder consultation process, we've reviewed the draft TDP rules, and NCCSA is of the view that the stakeholders that have been identified in the documents are adequate, and they adequately represent the stakeholders that we ought to be consulting going forward, and have been in the past TDP publications as well. Next slide, please, Walter. On this very last slide of the presentation, we hope to convey a few areas for enhancement in the current draft TDP rules as we have them. Firstly, around the definitions, our observation is that the document ought to align its definitions to those provided in the Act. By way of example, Chair, we have noted that there is, for example, the definition of license C that includes those deemed to be licensed. And our view is that this may bring about some confusion to the industry, and we recommend that it be aligned with the definition in the Act, or rephrased to do away with potential confusion. The second observation is regarding clause 4.2. This is now the diagram or flow diagram that depicts the TDP development process. Our observation on this particular provision in the draft rules is that there seems to be a duplication on two key activities, one being the strategic network scenario analysis. That's the duplication, and perhaps not a duplication on the second one, but rather an area to correct. There's a reference to assessment management plan, and our recommendation for that particular subsection of the clause is that it reads rather as a refurbishment plan. We have also observed in clause 5.1b, where we are noting that the provision seems to be requiring all network nodes to be N-1 compliant. We are of the view as NTCSA that for nodes where we have generation without any load currently committed, these nodes need not necessarily be N-1 compliant. Therefore, we are asking that this be reconsidered for rephrasing. Clause 6.1d, NCCSA's view is that this particular provision is perhaps not an outcome of 6.1, which is around the load forecasting, and we request a consideration for removing it. Further, to qualify this point, we have stated here that the compilation of the load forecast does not determine the generation assumptions as currently understood by the current wording of clause 6.1d. On clause 6.2, what we would like to submit is that the interpretation of the IRP does result in generation assumptions, which is apportioned both spatially and in a disaggregated manner. Currently, the clause seems to be referring to demand rather than generation assumptions. For 6.3, Chair, there is a mention of study of customer applications, which as NTCSA we feel is unclear, and we request that this particular asking be clarified so we can better understand the requirement. Regarding clause 8.4b, we as NTCSA are recommending that the committee considers making reference to generic generation connection requests. Our current understanding of the clause as it stands is that it is limited to bid windows, whereas we ought to be more generic and therefore non-discriminatory. And lastly, as a general remark, we have observed that the IRP is the basis for the TDP. And we would like to register that it would be useful for the rules to give clarity on the mechanism to ensure that the generation rollouts in terms of the technology and timelines, it does align with the IRP. Also, that further clarity be perhaps provided on the approach to be adopted when the rollouts deviates from the IRP. This is the current challenge that we are facing as planners, where our experience is that the generation on the ground is not necessarily aligning or following the IRP rollouts as envisaged. That would be the end of the presentation. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hadebe. I will now invite the members of the regulator to come in if they've got any questions. Thank you, members. Okay, I see Ms. Maseti. Thank you, Ms. Maseti.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Ms. Hadebe for the comprehensive presentation. I just have one question. The question relates to the slide that deals with the extent of information that must be provided, like in terms of the project list and the cost associated with each individual project. She made mention that perhaps there should be some exclusions in terms of the project list. I just need clarification there. I did not understand the rationale for the limitation in terms of the information that must be made available, and also these exclusions that she made mention of. Just to get the rationale on that. I saw issues of cost, and maybe you can just clarify what makes it difficult for NTCSA to not be in a position to provide the information, detailed information with regards to project lists and cost related to those projects, and what is it that will constrain NTCSA? Is it just issues of competition in terms of making certain information available? If that is the case, should that information not be provided on a confidential basis to the energy regulator to enable the regulator then to make informed decisions and have sufficient information on its disposal? I just want to clarify those aspects and see if my understanding is correct in terms of what was being asked. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maseti. And then I'm going to call upon Mr. Mkize.
Thanks, Chairperson, and thanks, Madam Hadebe, for the presentation. Appreciated. The only thing that I would just like to get clarity on is on the last part one slide, where you mentioned that they should delineate the mechanisms of alignment, for lack of a better word, with IRP, for example. I'm saying that when it comes to rules, it's either maybe if you can provide such from your side, maybe within the next 7 days, as part of augmentation of what you have presented, or maybe clarifying here to say, wouldn't it be better to leave it as is, because there are many ways and manner of ways that you would have that kind of an alignment, rather than to be too prescriptive about it, but to leave it open. I just didn't understand the prudence in being too prescriptive. I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mkize. Now I'm going to call upon Ms. Hadebe to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Ms. Maseti and Mr. Mkize for the two questions. Regarding the first question from Ms. Maseti around the provision of a project list with associated project costing at a individual project level, as we understand being asked in the draft TDP rules. To create perhaps some clarity, what we are recommending, Ms. Maseti here, is that the list can be provided. The contentious parts of that particular clause is the individualized costing that is associated with each and every project. I also appreciate that in your question, you simultaneously also recommended a possible recourse for us to try and meet the requirement, whereby you've suggested that perhaps as a consideration is that NCSA perhaps provides that information, costing information per project on a confidential basis to the regulator, as opposed to publicizing it in the TDP document. we have actually put our heads together as NTCSA, and it appears that this is a practice that we once heard as a business, and after some time, for some good reasons, I'm sure, it was then discontinued. But to come back to the question and to try and be more explicit in terms of my response, the response, ma'am, is that the project list is not a problem. The contentious part is providing what the cost of each project is in a public document such as the TDP. However, we are comfortable with the proposal that you've also mentioned, that we can still finish that information project cost on an individual basis, on a confidential basis to NESA without making it visible publicly in the TDP. I'm hoping I've answered you. Thank you, ma'am. I see your thumb going up. And then coming back to the second question by Mr. Mkhize around our discomfort as the NTCSA, as we endeavor to regularly develop and publish the TDP. What we are seeing is that the reality on the ground, the private space in particular, is not necessarily following what the IRP is asking to be rolled out. And that is a process which we feel is not in our control, and we're hoping that we could utilize this mechanism, the draft TDP rules, to perhaps propose some recommendations how to self-correct that gap that we see, because it becomes problematic to plan on something that you don't really know what it is in reality, because the private sector is simply going ahead and adding generation without necessarily checking that it is in line with the aspirations of the IRP. It's just a frustration, perhaps for lack of a better expression, that we are hoping to share with yourselves as the regulator here. However, we also appreciate what you've registered, Mr. Mkhize, that perhaps you wouldn't want to make the draft rules soon to be made permanent at some point to be too prescriptive, and perhaps our alternative avenue to try and address our current discomfort is that perhaps we could engage with the custodians of the IRP itself. It was just opportune enough that at this point we were presented with the draft TDP rules, and we felt we could utilize it to solve some of our problems, if that makes sense to you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hadebe. I think at this point now we have had presentations from our two presenters. So I must now take this opportunity to once again thank Mr. Kok as well as Ms. Hadebe for their presentations. And then from the part of the regulator, these presentations and the answers you gave to the questions are definitely going to be part of further consideration of the rules by NESA. So on that note, then I would like to propose to actually close the meeting now. Thank you very much to everybody for participating in this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Majola.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, members.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Chair.